Hello everyone, Giltar here with a movie review. This time we'll be looking at the Iron Man 3 movie. Now, I don't have any of the Iron Man 3 toys, so I'm just putting up two really great Iron Man 2 toys up for display on the camera. Now, as far as the review goes, I'll first give you guys a spoiler-free and sort of a straight-to-the-point view of the movie, and then after that I'll go into a more in-depth, spoiler-filled, full review for anyone else who wants to get spoiled for the movie experience, I guess. I also must add that I didn't see the 3D version of the movie, so I can't comment on that sort of experience for watching this movie. So starting off, for the short and sweet review, I'll simply say that Iron Man 3 is a good movie. It has a nice blend of action, humor, and drama. And while I must say that it's a good movie and it's something that I think any Marvel movie franchise fan can enjoy, it doesn't really give a significant feeling of connection to previous Marvel movies. It references them, but it does feel like it's somewhat apart. Now that can be a good or a bad thing. It's good in that this is a movie that can stand on its own as a standalone movie. However, it can be bad for those who are expecting the same tone in the previous films. If you don't have any set expectations, you will have a fun experience. So that's basically it for my sort of straight to the point review. For anyone else who isn't, wary of spoilers, here comes the full review, so you've been warned. I'll start off with the negatives of the movie. First one being, myself as a fan of the previous Iron Man movies and the Avengers movie, the shift in tone is something that did kind of surprise me a bit. It's not something that I necessarily dislike, but it is something that, again, it kind of surprised me. Now, I believe this is largely due to the fact that Jon Favreau is no longer the director. He's replaced by Shane Black, who is, I believe, a co-writer for this script. Jon Favreau is still in the movie in terms of playing the role of Happy Hogan, Tony Stark's bodyguard. Now, what I mean by shift or a difference in tone is essentially that the movie at times felt more comic book-like or action movie-ish. My fiance, who I watched the movie with, kind of said that it was somewhat silly at times. And by that, it was just like some of the elements were a little more over the top than what we've seen in previous Iron Man movies. And I'll just give a couple examples. First of all, the gunfights or confrontations that Tony gets into when he becomes sort of a covert operative or a spy, when he infiltrates the Mandarin's headquarters or his base. That's one example where it just felt kind of off. It wasn't like the Tony Stark character that we were used to in previous movies. Another example is the way that Tony is kind of an acrobat when in the final action scene of the movie when he goes from one suit of armor to another. It was really entertaining. It was really great sort of action content. But again, it felt kind of a little more larger than life in a way than what we were used to before from the Tony Stark character in terms of physicality. Finally, I think one example that really stood out to both of us was the way that Pepper in the final climatic action scene sort of goes into a battle trance mode and does some really crazy, cool stuff, but kind of like, I can understand it. It's kind of explained by what happens to her, but it just, again, it felt a little more off to us. And again, these aren't necessarily bad things, but it's just this whole shift in tone overall was really odd. Certain elements, like, for example, the violence was a little more brutal in this movie. Tony's interaction with the kid was a little more, I guess, harsh than I thought it would have been. I know the Tony Stark character is very sarcastic and narcissistic and such, but it came off as like he was more of a jerk than I was expecting, especially to a young child like that. It provided good humor, but again, it was just this overall shift in tone was something that I really wasn't expecting at all. And to me, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was something I noted, but I can definitely see this being something that definitely would not sit well with some fans, and it might be something that leaves a bad or a negative impression with them. Now, that in mind on that topic, I think basically why we see amped up elements of the action is because of how Iron Man 3 is placed in the chronology of the Marvel movie franchise. Keep in mind that while the previous Iron Man movies were mainly rooted in reality, but introduced elements of like fantastic science fiction, high technology concepts through Tony Stark and other characters. In those movies, the overall tone was definitely more grounded. However, this is a movie that takes place on Earth after a world, sort of affecting event in the alien invasion and the formation of the Avengers, which is basically a super team of people who have various backgrounds, but some of them are super powered, like Thor, who is literally a god, and we have someone like Captain America, who's a super soldier, the Incredible Hulk, Iron Man with his high technology. All these elements put together, you basically create a context in which the elements will be more fantastic. So I do understand the different or the elevated shift in tone, but again, that's something that is definitely very risky, and I've heard and read of some people's negative reactions to that change of tone. And actually, in one part of the movie, the character of Killian, he himself sort of makes a meta reference by basically saying, in a world in which all these events have happened, subtlety is not exactly adequate anymore. And I can understand that. So while it is a negative point, it's a negative point that I can understand. Now, the next negative point is basically the pacing at times. Overall, the movie had, good pacing, but there were times when I felt that the segues from humor to drama really lacked. And I think the movie could have used some better editing at certain parts. And while not a major negative, it is something that was enough to sort of make me pause and think, okay, why is this happening now, or what's going on? And brought me out of the immersion or the movie experience for a moment or two. Now, the next negative point is basically the Mandarin. For those who are fans of the source material of the Iron Man comic character, or the idea of the Mandarin as normally used in various, incarnations or iterations, the Iron Man 3 Mandarin is going to be jarring, and for some people it could be potentially offensive to them. I can imagine some fans being in an uproar due to how the Mandarin in Iron Man 3 is executed, how the character is carried out. However, I'm going to use this negative point to segue into the positive points of the movie. So, starting off, the version of the Mandarin in Iron Man 3, I think, is an extremely creative take on the character. Ben Kingsley, who plays the character, he makes the most of his material and of his screen time. I really like how this character is basically a distraction tactic utilized in a far larger plot. And I like the fact that he isn't a second main villain, not truly. I think that a movie with multiple main antagonists, more often than not, suffers for a dilution of dramatic attention. For example, I felt this was a weak point of Iron Man 2. In Iron Man 3, by having Killian create the character of Mandarin as a scapegoat for the public to be distracted by, it's just basically a stroke of genius. It makes Killian an even more competent antagonist, in my opinion. Which leads to the next positive point. Aldrich Killian, who is played by Guy Pearce. To me, Killian is the most successful antagonist of the 3 Iron Man movies. Obadiah Stane in the first movie was, in my opinion, a bit too much of a mustache-twirling caricature of a villain. The concept was kind of shallow. And the performance was okay. Now, in Iron Man 2, Ivan Vanko, as an antagonist, on paper, was alright. I mean, it was basically a simple revenge villain. However, Mickey Rourke's performance elevated the role a couple of notches. In a similar way, Justin Hammer, who was played by Sam Rockwell, not the greatest character on paper, but the performance really brought it up to something better. However, I mean, the way I looked at it was, due to the way that the antagonistic threats in Iron Man 2 had to be divided between multiple characters, the Justin Hammer character was basically relegated to being an incompetent goof. And Ivan Vanko was the more dangerous threat. But again, the shallow concept didn't really lend much to the overall character. Again, it was the performance that was good. It wasn't the character concept by any means. So in Iron Man 3, Killian is the one and true villain who is both intellectually and physically threatening. I mean, intellectually, he was the one who orchestrated the Mandarin ruse. He was the one that created this larger plot that many people weren't able to recognize. And physically, through the extremis procedure, he was enhanced to superhuman levels. So overall, I thought that Killian was a really great villain for the movie. Next up, Don Cheadle as Rhodey. I really liked the Rhodey character. I felt that in Iron Man 1 and 2, the character was underutilized, unfortunately. But in Iron Man 3, he was given some time to shine. I really liked how the character was shown that he was a competent, decorated soldier. He was able and capable of being a threat to superhumans in the final action sequence of the movie, and I really liked that. I mean, Rhodey was Stark's buddy in all movies, all three movies, and he is given screen time as War Machine, but it just felt like to me that out of all three movies, Rhodey was by far the most successful in Iron Man 3, especially, again, in the last action scene of the movie. I think that was the really great opportunity for the character to show how credible he was. And I really hope to see more of Rhodey utilized in a similar way if we see future Iron Man movies. Next up is kind of a given. Robert Downey Jr. is nothing less than great as Tony Stark. I mean, if anyone was born to play the character, it's Robert Downey Jr. And that's all I have to say about that. Just a great performance once again. Next up, I liked seeing how the Iron Man armory was utilized in the movie, how it was basically created through Tony's insomnia and difficulties with the post-traumatic stress disorder that he suffered from. We saw some really interesting concepts like the prehensile technology, the numerous variations of Iron Man technology in the armors. I also liked how his skills as an inventor was showcased when he was making the do-it-yourself gadgets that he came up with for assisting him for infiltrating the Mandarin's base. And as a final point, even though this isn't by any means a fully comprehensive list of pros and cons, but the final positive point for the movie is that while I realize it isn't a proper vehicle for showing a more realistic take on the progress and recovery from post-traumatic stress disorder, I really liked how the movie or the story addressed how Tony was affected by the numerous larger-than-life ordeals he went through, such as the villains he had to face in the previous Iron Man movies, the alien invasion, the Chitauri there, facing near-death experiences on more than one occasion. All these things are extremely stressful, I think, if you expose one person to all of them over a course of time. And we see this. I mean, Tony is affected, and it scars him in a way. Again, while this isn't the proper movie for showing that kind of problem, that kind of issue that a person can suffer from, because it seemed like he kind of recovered from it fairly easily at the end, and nothing more was said of it. But I do like the fact that psychological stress or psychological trauma is addressed in this movie. I mean, we saw a touch of psychological trauma and stress in the Captain America character in the Avengers movie, where we sort of got a glimpse of his struggle with understanding a world that is decades ahead of his time. I mean, he essentially is thrown from the 1940s into over a half a century later, and he's trying to basically cope with a world that he previously could only imagine through fiction. I hope we see more of this covered in the upcoming Winter Soldier movie. And if we do see future Iron Man movies, or I'm assuming we are going to be getting another Avengers movie, I believe, we see more, I guess, again, addressing, no matter how briefly, addressing of these characters who are all pretty much human on some level, except for maybe Thor, how they must, basically deal with these potentially traumatic events that they go through. So overall, I definitely recommend this movie, especially to any fan of the Iron Man character. For those who are diehard fans of the Marvel movie franchise, I do recommend this movie too. However, as I previously said, it is a movie that is somewhat apart from the other movies in terms of tone. So as long as you can approach this movie with an open mind, you're gonna enjoy it. If you are dead set on seeing another Iron Man movie that is very similar to the previous Iron Man movies, you might be disappointed. So that's it for my review. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, as usual. Have yourselves a great day, and I'll see you at the next video.